Colonel Ward had learned long ago that the world rarely notices those who blend in. She had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, not in the literal sense, of course, but in the way one moved, spoke, and carried themselves without drawing attention. Today, she walked across the quiet private airfield in plain jeans, worn leather boots, and a simple jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over her hair. To anyone passing by, she looked like just another member of the cleaning or maintenance crew, perhaps someone who had been sent to wipe the tarmac or inspect the aircraft for minor scuffs. But was no ordinary civilian. A decorated United States Navy SEAL colonel, she had led some of the most dangerous and secretive operations in recent military history. Her face and rank were familiar in certain high-level circles, but here, on a sunlit runway hundreds of miles from Washington, D.C., she was just another shadow walking quietly past hangars and parked jets. That was exactly how she wanted it. Her mission today was simple on paper: perform a discreet security inspection on a private aircraft scheduled for high-level transport later in the week. It was a detail she could have delegated to junior officers, but she preferred to handle it herself. A woman like her thrived on control, on knowing every inch of the operation firsthand. And yet, there was something strangely satisfying about flying under the radar, being underestimated, and seeing how the world reacted when the illusion of ordinariness shattered. The airfield was unusually quiet for a weekday morning. A few maintenance vehicles hummed softly, mechanics moved lazily from hangar to hangar, and the smell of jet fuel hung in the crisp air. Approached the aircraft, a sleek executive jet with a polished black fuselage that reflected the bright morning sun. She knelt briefly to examine the wheels and landing gear, tapping lightly, listening for irregular sounds. Every movement was deliberate, precise, a dance perfected over years of rigorous training. From a distance, a man's voice interrupted the quiet. "Hey, who's that?" Didn't turn immediately. She had grown accustomed to being noticed or deliberately ignored, depending on the circumstances. But the tone carried arrogance, an edge of superiority that set her senses on alert. She straightened slightly and scanned the tarmac. A man was striding toward her, his leather flight jacket open, revealing a crisp uniform shirt beneath. The polished shoes and confident gait spoke volumes before he even opened his mouth. Captain Crane, a pilot who clearly believed that the air around him belonged solely to him. He was the kind of man who expected respect merely by stepping into a cockpit, and apparently anyone failing to notice that fact was about to feel his wrath. Crane stopped a few feet from her, hands planted on his hips like a general confronting a subordinate. His gaze swept over her from head to toe, a barely concealed smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Excuse me," he barked, loud enough for the few mechanics and hangar staff to glance over. "You're not supposed to be here." Lifted her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze evenly. Her voice was calm, almost neutral, betraying none of the irritation that bubbled beneath. "I'm assigned to inspect this aircraft," she said simply, her tone polite yet firm. Crane laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "You assigned to my plane? Don't make me laugh, you're clearly—" He didn't finish his sentence. A couple of nearby crew members snickered, and the airfield suddenly felt smaller, the quiet morning now charged with tension. However, was unfazed. She had faced far more dangerous adversaries than a pompous pilot and a handful of snickering mechanics. Years of missions in hostile territories had taught her that arrogance was often a mask for ignorance, and today it was on full display. "Step away from the aircraft," Crane said, his voice now a mix of irritation and mock authority. "This isn't your place." Straightened fully, brushing invisible dust from her jacket. She did not argue. Instead, she took a single step back, calculating her next move. Patience had been her ally in countless operations, and it would be here as well. "Look, I don't know what kind of job you think you're doing," Crane continued, his eyes narrowing, "but you are not part of my crew. You're not authorized near this aircraft. Step back, now." A few more crew members began to gather, curious about the escalating confrontation. Whispers filled the air. Some of them chuckled again, believing this was a simple misunderstanding, a low-ranking employee caught where she shouldn't be. Others simply watched silently, unsure whether to intervene. His mind worked quietly, methodically. She assessed the pilot, his posture, the inflection in his voice, the twitch of his jaw, all arrogance, all ego, all predictable. She had studied personalities like this for years, learned how to diffuse, dominate, or bypass them when necessary. But in this case, patience and observation were far more effective. "Sir," she said finally, her voice steady, "I am fully authorized. I am here to inspect the aircraft. If there is a protocol, I will follow it. But your assumptions about me are incorrect." Crane laughed again, louder this time. "You, inspecting my plane. I've been flying for 20 years and I've never had a janitor or a cleaning lady tell me how to do my job." Something in his expression shifted just slightly. A tiny flash of steel in her eyes, a hint of what lay beneath the ordinary exterior. But still, she said nothing further, simply nodded and stepped aside as if the matter were beneath her notice. To Crane or anyone else on the tarmac, that single moment of condescension would trigger a series of events that would forever alter their perception of authority, competence, and respect. Because the quiet, calm woman standing before them was not here by chance. She was not just another worker. She was Colonel Ward, United States Navy SEAL, a woman whose name commanded fear and respect in corridors of power and battlefields alike. And Crane, with all his bravado and self-assuredness, had no idea who he had just insulted. As she finished her brief examination of the aircraft, quietly contacted her team through a secure channel. Within minutes, backup would arrive, not to intimidate, not to punish, but to assert the professional reality that Crane had arrogantly ignored. She glanced at the pilot one last time, her face calm, almost serene. The storm was coming, but it would be delivered with the precision and efficiency that defined her career. The morning sun glinted off the polished fuselage, and for the first time Crane felt a flicker of unease. Something about her was different, but he couldn't yet put a finger on it. By the time he realized the full truth, the lesson would already be, and it was one he would never forget. Captain Crane had always taken pride in his command of the skis. To him, every aircraft he piloted was an extension of himself, a machine that responded to his will, a realm in which his authority was absolute. On this bright morning at the quiet private airfield, he had expected routine. Yet, standing a few feet away, examining the sleek executive jet with quiet precision, was a woman who, in his mind, didn't belong there. A woman dressed like cleaning staff, moving with calm assurance as if she owned the tarmac, and for some inexplicable reason, she dared to ignore his authority. Crane's chest swelled with irritation. "Who does she think she is?" he muttered under his breath, though his words carried across the hangar. His first instinct was to assert control, to remind this intruder of the strict hierarchy he believed governed every aspect of the airfield. He had been a pilot for over 20 years, and in his experience, no one outside the crew, maintenance staff, or approved inspectors dared approach the aircraft without explicit permission. And yet here she was, calmly inspecting every inch of the jet. He strode toward her with deliberate confidence, each step punctuated by the polished shine of his shoes on the tarmac. "Excuse me," he barked, stopping just a few feet from her, his hands planted firmly on his hips, a posture meant to dominate. "You're not authorized to be here. Step away from the aircraft immediately." Lifted her eyes slowly, her calm gaze meeting his. She studied him as carefully as he studied the plane, noting the subtle tension in his jaw, the overconfidence that radiated like heat from a furnace. Her voice remained steady, almost neutral. "I'm assigned to inspect this aircraft," she said, her words polite yet firm, her demeanor unshakable. Crane laughed, a sharp, dismissive bark that carried across the tarmac. "You, assigned, don't make me laugh. You're clearly," he trailed off, because the absurdity of the situation itself seemed to catch him off guard. Crew members standing nearby chuckled, thinking they were witnessing a harmless misunderstanding, a lower-ranking staff member wandering where she had no business. Didn't move. She didn't argue. Years of covert missions had taught her that confrontation was rarely about proving a point. It was about strategy, patience, and timing. She allowed Crane to overreach, to make himself look foolish, knowing that every word, every gesture was laying the groundwork for what would come next. "Step away now," Crane demanded, his voice rising in both volume and urgency. His ego bristled at her calm defiance, and he expected compliance immediately. Around them, the tarmac had grown quiet, the few mechanics and attendants watching this odd confrontation with curiosity and amusement. Gave a single composed nod. She took a measured step back, her hands loose at her sides, her posture still commanding even as she obeyed. She spoke quietly, not to provoke but to assert her truth. "Sir, I am fully authorized. I am here to inspect this aircraft. Your assumptions about me are incorrect." Crane's eyes narrowed. "Assumptions, assumptions. I've been flying for 2 decades. I've never had a cleaning staff member tell me how to do my job. Step aside." He waved his hand dismissively, as if brushing away a bothersome insect. A few crew members stifled laughter. One of them whispered, "She looks like she's about to mop the floor, not inspect a jet." Another snickered, shaking their head. Crane, emboldened by the support of the bystanders, felt a surge of righteous authority. He was certain that any threat to his ego would be removed with a stern word and a sharp command. But Ward had long ago learned to use overconfidence against others. She had trained SEAL teams in hostile territory, faced enemies who underestimated her every day, and survived because she knew when to wait, when to observe, and when to act. Crane was displaying classic signs: puffed chest, raised voice, and the fundamental error of assuming that power comes from position rather than competence. "I understand you have your perspective, Captain," she said calmly, each word precise. "But my assignment comes from the highest level of security authority. This aircraft is under my inspection. Interference from unauthorized personnel could compromise both safety and operational protocol." Crane blinked. His confidence faltered for a moment, but his pride immediately surged back. He wasn't about to admit ignorance to someone he still assumed was beneath him. "Operational protocol. You're. His words stumbled over themselves. His face flushed as he searched for an insult that might restore his sense of superiority. The tension was electric. Everyone on the tarmac could sense that this was no ordinary disagreement. Mechanics and attendants shifted uneasily, realizing this wasn't just a routine miscommunication. It was something more, though they couldn't yet identify what. Crane, however, remained blinded by ego. To him, she was still a trespasser, a pretender, a challenge to his authority that must be crushed. "Step away immediately, or I will have you removed," Crane barked, his voice echoing against the hangars. He glanced around, hoping someone would back him up. A couple of crew members hesitated, but no one moved to intervene. The power dynamics were shifting, but Crane was oblivious. His gaze remained steady. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. Every movement was deliberate, every pause calculated. She was calm, as if the world around her had slowed. She knew that appearances were everything here. Crane saw her as insignificant, unaware that his next misstep would set off a chain of events he could neither control nor undo. Then she did something unexpected. She took out her phone and tapped a secure channel, sending a brief, coded message to her team. Within minutes, backup would arrive, not in anger, not in intimidation, but as a demonstration of authority that Crane could not ignore. She returned the phone to her pocket with a faint smile, almost imperceptible. Crane did not notice it, but it marked the turning point. By now, several nearby staff had stopped whispering and were staring openly. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Crane, proud and oblivious, didn't yet realize that he had misjudged her entirely. To him, this was a simple matter of asserting authority. It was a matter of patience and precision, ensuring that the arrogance in front of her would face reality in a way that no shouting or argument could achieve. "Sir," she said softly, almost too quiet to hear over the hum of distant engines, "I will complete my inspection. You may choose to stay or step aside. Your compliance is not required. My assignment is non-negotiable." Crane's ego recoiled. This was not how people responded to him. His voice faltered slightly as he tried to recover. "Non-negotiable? Who do you think you are?" At that moment, allowed the faintest flicker of steel to show in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had stared danger in the face countless times, who had led men into combat and returned them safely, who had faced enemies far more ruthless than any pilot. Crane had never encountered a situation like this before, and he had no frame of reference. Before he could respond, turned slightly and continued her inspection. Each movement was precise, professional, deliberate. She tapped the wheels, examined the fuselage, and checked the access panels with trained fingers. She did not rush. She did not falter. She simply continued, fully aware that Crane was watching, fully aware that his assumptions about her were about to unravel in a way that would leave him humiliated. The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Crew members and attendants whispered nervously. A few cameras in the hangar might have caught the interaction, though none realized the significance at the time. Crane's sense of control was slipping, and with each passing second, his quiet authority grew. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to threaten. Her very presence was enough. And then the first sign of the inevitable arrived. Two black SUVs appeared at the edge of the tarmac, their engines humming with a presence that immediately commanded attention. Military personnel stepped out, scanning the airfield. Crew members straightened. Crane's confident posture faltered slightly, but he forced a smirk, unwilling to concede yet. Noticed them without a word. She acknowledged them with a subtle nod. The scene was set. The moment Crane had been blind to was approaching, and very soon he would discover just who he had been confronting, and why his arrogance had been such a dangerous mistake. The quiet hum of the early morning airfield had shifted into a tense, almost electric stillness. Crew members and mechanics, once busy with routine tasks, had frozen in place, watching the confrontation unfold like spectators to a drama they hadn't signed up for. Captain Crane's chest heaved, his pride battered by the calm defiance of the woman he still assumed was just a cleaning staff member. Every word he had spoken, every gesture of authority, had been met with unwavering composure. It was a scenario that rattled him to his core, though he refused to admit it even to himself. Ward continued her inspection of the aircraft with meticulous care. Every step, every tap, every movement was precise. She knelt by the landing gear, checked the fuselage seams, and gently pressed the access panels. To the untrained eye, it appeared she was simply performing a routine pre-flight check. But to anyone familiar with aviation protocols, and more importantly, military operations, her actions carried weight, authority, and an understanding that few could rival. Crane, however, remained fixated on her, eyes narrowing as he tried to find the thread of legitimacy in her presence. "I don't care who assigned you," he barked, his voice slightly trembling despite his effort to sound commanding. "This is my aircraft. Step away now, or I'll have security remove you myself." Didn't flinch. Her calmness was deliberate, a technique honed over years of handling hostile situations where anger or panic would be a liability. She simply looked up, meeting his gaze steadily. "Captain Crane, I'm not asking for your permission. This aircraft is under my inspection per a high-level security assignment. Your interference could jeopardize safety and protocol. Step aside, or I will be forced to escalate the matter." The word escalate hung in the air like a bell tolling. Crew members whispered among themselves, glancing nervously at the distant hangars and the far-off runway. Something serious was about to happen, though none could fully articulate what. Crane, still blinded by ego, dismissed the threat. He assumed that anyone daring to speak to him in this tone was bluffing or out of her depth. "Escalate?" he scoffed. "Do you even know who I am? I've been flying these skis longer than you've probably been alive. Step aside now." Allowed a tiny smile to brush her lips, not one of mockery, but of quiet acknowledgement. The absurdity of the moment wasn't lost on her. Here stood a man convinced of his own importance, unaware that the world he thought he controlled had already shifted around him. And then the first ripple of reality struck. Two black SUVs, sleek and unmarked, pulled onto the tarmac with engines purring like predators. Military personnel emerged, their posture disciplined, their eyes scanning the scene with practiced precision. Crew members stiffened, realizing that this was no ordinary dispute. Crane's smirk faltered. He opened his mouth to assert authority, but no words emerged. The presence of uniformed operatives immediately shifted the power dynamic. Still calm, subtly gestured with her hand. The personnel approached, flanking her with quiet authority. The pilot finally caught the glint of insignia on their uniforms. His confident facade cracked for the first time, replaced by uncertainty and a faint twinge of fear. The field director rushed out from one of the hangars, a mix of curiosity and concern on his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, glancing between Crane and the woman. "Why is there a confrontation?" Crane straightened, struggling to maintain his composure. "Sir, this woman, she's not authorized, she's just some." His words stumbled, his confidence waning. Finally spoke, her voice calm but commanding, cutting through the rising tension. "Director, I am Colonel Ward, United States Navy SEALs. I am assigned to inspect this aircraft for a high-level security operation. Captain Crane's interference has already caused a procedural violation." The director froze. Crew members exchanged stunned glances. Crane's face drained of color. He had assumed she was a low-level staff member, someone beneath notice. And now, standing before him with calm authority, she revealed herself to be someone far above him in rank, competence, and experience. "Call Colonel Ward," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "Yes," confirmed, her gaze steady. "And this inspection must continue without further interference. Your assumptions about personnel should never override protocol or respect." A tense silence followed. The crew, previously smirking and whispering, now looked uncomfortable, ashamed even, as the full weight of the situation settled over them. Crane's ego, once towering and impenetrable, had collapsed under the simple revelation of her identity. The mechanics shifted their feet, realizing they had witnessed a man publicly humiliated by someone they had all underestimated. The military team surrounding began the procedural enforcement of her authority. They approached the aircraft to ensure that inspections were conducted in compliance with her directive, and a sense of order began to return. Crane, meanwhile, retreated a few steps, his face pale. He knew, deep down, that he had mishandled the situation, but his pride kept him from immediate apology. "Colonel Ward," one of the senior operatives said quietly, "will ensure the inspection proceeds smoothly. Captain Crane and his crew will comply." Nodded, her attention returning to the aircraft. She crouched by the engine intake, inspecting components with trained precision. Crane stood nearby, attempting to regain his composure, but every glance he cast her way reminded him of his error. He had mistaken a decorated military officer for cleaning staff, and the mistake was not minor. Crew members slowly began to approach, whispering apologies. Some mumbled quietly to each other about how they had misjudged her entirely, how appearances could be deceiving, and how dangerous arrogance could be. Even the field director, usually calm and composed, seemed unsettled by the chain of events. Calm authority dominated the scene, but she allowed a subtle lesson to unfold. She didn't yell, she didn't humiliate Crane, and she didn't boast. Her presence alone conveyed the reality. Competence, preparation, and discipline far outweighed bluster, assumptions, and self-importance. Crane, finally understanding the enormity of his mistake, swallowed hard. Words failed him. All he could do was watch as the inspection proceeded under the supervision of the woman he had publicly dismissed. Every movement she made, every decision she executed, reinforced the truth he could no longer deny. He had judged her entirely wrong, and now the consequences were unavoidable. The airfield was quiet again, though not in the way it had been before. The tension had shifted, replaced by an uneasy acknowledgement that hierarchy, authority, and respect were not always visible at first glance. Crane realized that the simple act of assuming someone's role based on appearances could have serious repercussions, something he would remember for the rest of his career. His voice finally cut through the murmurs, calm, steady, and commanding. "This aircraft inspection is complete. Captain Crane, I trust you understand the importance of following proper protocol in the future." Crane nodded mutely, still absorbing the lesson. Around him, the crew began to process the day's events, their respect for the quiet woman growing as her authority became undeniable. For the moment was a textbook example of leadership, patience, and strategic execution. She had allowed Crane's ego to reveal itself, waited for the proper moment, and then allowed the truth to unfold naturally. The pilot's humiliation was public, undeniable, and entirely deserved. And yet, his handling of it was flawless. Firm but fair, authoritative but composed, commanding respect without anger, teaching a lesson without resorting to theatrics. By the time the military team departed, the airfield had returned to relative normalcy. But Crane, mechanics, and staff would not soon forget the morning they misjudged a woman who, in reality, was far more powerful, capable, and disciplined than any of them had imagined. Turned, walking toward her vehicle with quiet grace, leaving behind a field of humbled, chastened witnesses. She carried no gloating, no malice, only a steady, unshakable sense that respect, competence, and calm authority had triumphed. And somewhere in the back of Crane's mind, a lesson had been learned. Never underestimate someone based on appearance alone. Captain Crane had thought the morning was simply another routine assignment, one in which his authority as a seasoned pilot would go unquestioned. He had been wrong, very wrong. The moment Colonel Ward had revealed her identity, the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The arrogant confidence he had carried like armor now felt hollow, as if someone had hollowed out the core of his self-assurance. Every casual smirk, every dismissive gesture, suddenly seemed like a miscalculation of disastrous proportions. The tarmac, once quiet except for the hum of distant engines, now buzzed with whispers and nervous glances. Crew members moved cautiously, unsure how to behave around the sudden presence of uniformed military personnel flanking a woman they had all misjudged. Black SUVs had arrived earlier, and now officers in crisp uniforms were stepping forward with the precision and authority that only comes from years of disciplined training. Their eyes scanned the area, taking in the jet, the staff, and most importantly, the pilot whose misplaced arrogance had triggered the situation. Crane's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, as if he were searching for the right words, an apology, a defense, a justification, but none came. His pride had been wounded too deeply, and even more he sensed that the rules of engagement had changed entirely. The woman he had dismissed as cleaning staff was no ordinary officer. She was a high-ranking SEAL colonel. Every instinct he had for command and authority suddenly seemed irrelevant. Colonel Ward stood calmly, almost serene, despite the tension surrounding her. There was no overt anger, no loud confrontation, nothing that would escalate the situation unnecessarily. Her demeanor alone commanded respect, though Crane had yet to realize fully how formidable she was. She gave a subtle nod to one of the uniformed officers, and in a matter of seconds, the situation had escalated from a confrontation to an organized, controlled military procedure. "Captain Crane," the officer said quietly, addressing him directly, "we need to conduct a formal review of your conduct on the tarmac. Colonel Ward has been assigned to oversee security protocols here, and your interference has triggered a breach of procedure." Crane's eyes widened. He felt as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, only now realizing the depth of the fall ahead. "A breach of what?" She's. His words stumbled, betraying the nervous tension in his voice. He looked toward the crew, silently hoping someone would back him up, but no one dared. Even the field director's expression had changed from curiosity to sober concern. "Step aside, Captain," Colonel Ward said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that left no room for argument. "The review will proceed without interference. Any further attempts to obstruct protocol will be noted in the investigation." Crane felt a bead of sweat forming at his temple. His pride, once towering and untouchable, had been dismantled with simple composure, confidence, and professional authority. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. The weight of the situation was inescapable. Minutes later, the official investigation team arrived, fully equipped to document the incident. They began interviewing crew members, mechanics, and the pilot himself. Crane tried to explain his perspective, but the words faltered in his mouth. Each time he spoke, Colonel Ward's composed demeanor reminded him silently that his assumptions had been flawed. She had not raised her voice, she had not threatened, and yet her presence dominated the room entirely. One of the senior officers said quietly, "We'll ensure the inspection proceeds smoothly. Captain Crane and his crew will comply fully." Nodded, her attention returning to the aircraft. She crouched near the fuselage, checking the seams and panels with her trained hands. Her every move reinforced the lesson that Crane had yet to fully absorb. Arrogance, assumptions, and ego could not override expertise, experience, and authority. The investigation proceeded systematically. Crane was asked to recount his actions from the moment he first noticed on the tarmac. He stumbled through his explanation, attempting to defend his assumptions and authority. But every point he made was countered not with confrontation, but with calm, precise logic. His team, her assignment, her authority, and her credentials, leaving no room for dispute. Crew members approached Colonel Ward quietly, offering apologies for their earlier reactions. Some muttered under their breath about how easily appearances could deceive, how they had misjudged someone based on attire and demeanor. Others, more cautious, kept their distance, yet watched intently as the procedure unfolded. Even the field director, normally composed and assertive, seemed to gain a newfound respect for the officer standing before him. Crane stood apart, silent, absorbing each revelation with a mix of disbelief and humiliation. He had always believed that confidence, authority, and years of experience in the cockpit gave him absolute control over any situation on his aircraft. But in the presence of Colonel Ward, he realized how narrow and incomplete that perception had been. Experience alone was insufficient when untempered by humility, awareness, and respect. The investigation moved methodically, documenting every step of the incident, including Crane's public confrontation and the crew's initial misjudgments. Each detail was meticulously recorded. Observed the proceedings with calm detachment, occasionally offering clarifications and instructions where necessary. Her authority was never questioned again. Every person present understood, consciously or unconsciously, that she was in full command. Crane tried desperately to regain some sense of control. He offered explanations, attempted to redirect blame, and even tried to inject humor to lighten the tension. None of it worked. His presence was a quiet, unyielding reminder that competence and authority were far more powerful than ego or bluster. Each failed attempt only deepened his realization that his arrogance had led him into a situation he could not undo. As the investigation continued, Colonel Ward began overseeing the security inspection personally. Every panel was checked, every protocol. Crane and the crew were required to follow her instructions precisely, without deviation. The process was calm, controlled, and deliberate, emphasizing competence and professionalism over confrontation or aggression. Crane's pride took each step as a personal humiliation, but there was no immediate recourse, no opportunity for argument. The authority of Colonel Ward was absolute. Minutes stretched into an hour, and Crane's nervousness only grew. He watched as the woman he had dismissed carried out her duties with precision and calm authority. He began to realize the magnitude of his mistake. Misjudging someone's abilities based on appearance could have catastrophic consequences, both for protocol and for personal reputation. By the time the inspection concluded, the aircraft had been thoroughly examined, and every procedural step had been. Crane was left standing quietly, his ego bruised, his pride shattered, and his understanding of true authority forever changed. Crew members watched him in silence, understanding the lesson he had just learned. Colonel Ward finally turned, her gaze calm, her demeanor composed, and addressed the assembled team. This concludes the inspection. Captain Crane and all personnel involved are reminded that assumptions about anyone, based on appearance or perceived rank, can lead to serious operational and procedural errors. Respect is not optional, it is mandatory. The words hung in the air. Crane swallowed, nodding mutely, fully aware that the weight of her statement applied not only to him, but to anyone present who had misjudged her. It was a moment of accountability, and no amount of ego or authority could alter it. As the team began to leave, Colonel Ward quietly observed the pilot and the crew. There was no gloating, no malice, only a firm, calm sense of authority. Crane, meanwhile, stood silently, absorbing every lesson, every detail, every word. He had been humbled, corrected, and reminded that true authority is earned, not assumed. The morning sun reflected off the polished fuselage of the aircraft, highlighting the contrast between arrogance and competence, assumption and reality. Colonel Ward had turned what began as a confrontation into a controlled lesson in respect, procedure, and professionalism. Crane would never forget it. By the time she left the airfield, Ward had completed her assignment flawlessly. The incident, while embarrassing for the pilot, served as a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that authority and competence could not be judged superficially, and that true leadership required patience, discipline, and unwavering confidence. The military team followed her quietly, ensuring that protocol had been observed and that Crane's actions were documented for official review. The pilot, mechanics, and crew were left to reflect on the morning's events, each carrying the lessons learned in different ways. For Crane, the realization was profound. He had underestimated a person based on appearance alone, and it had been a mistake he would never make again. The airfield was unusually quiet after the formal inspection and initial investigation. Crew members lingered in small groups, whispering about the morning's events, while Captain Crane sat alone near the edge of the tarmac, staring blankly at the polished fuselage of the executive jet. His pride, once a source of confidence and identity, had been shattered completely. For the first time in decades of piloting, he felt powerless, exposed, and painfully aware of his own assumptions. Colonel Ward, having completed the inspection with flawless precision, now turned to address the assembled personnel. Her demeanor was calm, her posture commanding but not threatening. She had no need for theatrics. Her authority emanated naturally from every measured movement and deliberate word. "Captain Crane," she began, her voice firm yet neutral. "This is Colonel Ward, United States Navy SEALs, commanding officer of this security operation. Your interference today constituted a breach of protocol and demonstrated a lapse in professional judgment. The investigation has all procedures and assignments. There is no ambiguity regarding the responsibilities here." The silence was deafening. Crew members and field staff who had previously smirked or whispered were now staring in awe and disbelief. Crane's face had turned pale, a stark contrast to his previously flushed, confident expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but found that words failed him. Continued, her eyes scanning the gathered team, ensuring her message was received. "Let this be a lesson to all personnel present. Assumptions based on appearance, clothing, or perceived rank are dangerous. Respect must be afforded to individuals based on authority, competence, and the roles assigned, not on preconceived notions or ego." Crane finally managed to croak out a sentence. I didn't know. I thought she was cleaning staff." The words sounded hollow in the presence of Colonel Ward. She looked at him directly, her gaze unwavering. "You did not know. And yet, you assumed. Your assumptions led to public interference with an ongoing military operation, placing both personnel and equipment at risk. Understanding the magnitude of that mistake is the first step toward accountability. The words cut deeper than Crane expected. Unlike earlier confrontations, there was no shouting, no ridicule, no drama. Yet every word carried weight, every phrase highlighted the consequences of arrogance and misjudgment. For the first time, Crane understood that he had miscalculated entirely. Several crew members approached cautiously, offering murmured apologies for their behavior earlier. We didn't realize," one mechanic said quietly, his eyes cast downward. "We shouldn't have laughed. We misjudged you." Nodded, accepting the apologies with measured grace. Acknowledging your errors is a sign of growth. Remember, these lessons are more valuable when learned before tragedy strikes. The field director stepped forward, his expression serious. "Colonel Ward, we appreciate your professionalism. Captain Crane and his crew will be held accountable according to protocol. This incident has highlighted gaps in procedure and attitude that must be addressed immediately." Crane swallowed hard. Every instinct in him screamed defensively, yet he knew there was nothing he could say to undo the morning's events. His assumptions, his ego, and his lack of awareness had been exposed publicly, in front of colleagues, supervisors, and the very authority he had dismissed. The military personnel accompanying Colonel Ward began finalizing reports, documenting each aspect of the confrontation. Crane was required to recount his actions step by step, providing a complete account of his decisions, assumptions, and the reasoning behind his behavior. Each answer he gave was carefully noted, each lapse meticulously recorded. Observed silently, her eyes calm but penetrating. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded attention. Every detail of Crane's account reinforced the lesson. Assumptions and arrogance were dangerous. Even small errors, when coupled with authority, could have serious consequences. Once the formal investigation was complete, Colonel Ward addressed Crane directly. "Your judgment today endangered the operation and compromised security protocols. While no immediate physical harm occurred, the breach in procedure is unacceptable. Remediation is required, both for your own accountability and for the safety of personnel under your supervision." Crane's throat tightened. "I understand, Colonel," he muttered, the words feeling like an admission of humiliation. Nodded, acknowledging his compliance without any overt satisfaction. Understanding is not enough. Reflection, corrective action, and commitment to proper protocol are essential. Leadership is not a function of position alone. It is a responsibility, one that requires humility, respect, and awareness. Several minutes passed as crew members absorbed her words. Some were visibly humbled, others thoughtful, while Crane remained rooted to the spot, a silent testament to the consequences of misjudgment. He could no longer rely on charm, ego, or assumed authority. Today had demonstrated unequivocally that appearances could be deceiving, and competence could not be ignored. The field director added, "Captain Crane will undergo a mandatory review and retraining program. His actions and the consequences of those actions will be documented for future operational reference. This is not punishment, it is accountability." Crane nodded again, his pride battered but beginning to understand the depth of the lesson. He had been arrogant, dismissive, and blind to the authority before him. The realization was painful but necessary. Meanwhile, Colonel Ward concluded her address to the gathered personnel. "Let this incident serve as a reminder to all. Respect must be earned through diligence, preparation, and professionalism, not assumed based on ego or appearances. Every individual, regardless of outward impression, carries responsibility and capability that should never be underestimated." Her words resonated across the airfield. Crew members, previously amused by the confrontation, now absorbed the gravity of the situation. They understood that the morning's events were more than a personal clash. They were a lesson in operational integrity, leadership, and humility. As the group began to disperse, Crane lingered, staring at the jet and then at Colonel Ward. He couldn't shake the image of her calm composure, the effortless authority she had wielded without raising her voice, and the undeniable competence she had demonstrated. For the first time, he truly understood the meaning of respect earned through action rather than assumed through position. The military team followed Colonel Ward as she completed the final procedural checks, ensuring all documentation was accurate and that the aircraft was fully compliant with security protocols. Crane observed, silent, absorbing every movement, every detail, every lesson she imparted without overt instruction. He realized that she had taught not just him, but the entire airfield staff, a lesson they would never forget. When the inspection was complete, Colonel Ward finally turned to leave. She walked with quiet dignity, her posture calm, yet unmistakably commanding. Crew members and field staff watched her go, understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a professional capable of commanding respect through action alone, without ego or spectacle. Crane remained behind for a moment, reflecting. The sting of humiliation lingered, but it was tempered by a growing awareness of the lesson he had learned. For decades, he had relied on authority derived from rank and experience. Today had shown him that true leadership required humility, discernment, and respect for the competence of others. As Colonel Ward departed the airfield, Crane finally approached the field director. "I understand," he said quietly. "I need to reflect and learn from this." The director nodded. "That's the point. Mistakes can be costly, but growth is possible if lessons are internalized. Colonel Ward has shown us all what professional authority looks like." Crane nodded again, swallowing hard. The weight of the morning, the lessons learned, and the undeniable reality of Colonel Ward's competence settled over him like a storm finally giving way to calm. He knew his journey toward true respect and accountability had just begun. The airfield slowly returned to routine. Engines hummed, crew members resumed tasks, and the jet gleamed under the sun. But the memory of the morning lingered, a vivid reminder of humility, authority, and the consequences of misjudgment. For Crane and for everyone present, Colonel Ward had left an indelible mark, not just through her rank or assignments, but through her composure, competence, and unwavering command of respect. Captain Crane sat in a small break room near the tarmac, staring blankly at the wall. The events of the morning refused to leave his mind. He replayed every detail. The first moment he had seen Ward approaching the aircraft, the confidence in her calm movements, the subtle authority that had radiated from her without a single raised voice. He had been certain he controlled the situation, certain that his authority as a pilot granted him unquestioned command of the airfield. And yet, by the time the morning ended, that certainty had been stripped away. The field director approached cautiously, sensing the pilot's discomfort. "Captain Crane," he said quietly, "this isn't just about the incident. It's about understanding the lesson. Ward doesn't just command respect because of her rank. She earns it through discipline, preparation, and composure. Today, you witnessed a professional at the peak of her abilities." Crane nodded slowly, the weight of acknowledgement pressing down on him. I didn't realize," he muttered. "I thought he trailed off, unable to complete the thought without feeling the sting of humiliation. The director nodded. "Assumptions can be costly, Captain, and today they were. But that's why we conduct these reviews, not to punish but to correct behavior and ensure operational integrity. You'll undergo retraining in protocol, security procedures, and leadership assessment. This isn't personal, it's professional accountability." Crane exhaled sharply, realizing that the lesson went far beyond the morning's confrontation. It wasn't just about a misunderstanding on the tarmac. It was about respect, authority, and recognizing the competence of others without prejudice. Meanwhile, Colonel Ward returned to her team, who had set up a temporary operations center near the airfield. They had been monitoring the situation from a distance, ready to intervene if necessary, and now they gathered to debrief and prepare the next steps in the operation. Ward moved with the quiet efficiency that had become her trademark, checking documentation, reviewing inspection protocols, and ensuring that every procedural step had been executed flawlessly. Her team noticed the shift in the crew and the pilot. Mechanics who had laughed or whispered now stood, more attentive. Their attitude had changed not because of fear, but because they had seen competence and authority demonstrated in the most undeniable way. "Colonel," one of her officers said quietly, "Captain Crane and his team have been ordered to follow retraining and review procedures. They understand the severity of their lapse, though the reaction on the tarmac, well, it left an impression." Ward nodded, her eyes scanning the airfield. "Good. The impression is necessary. Respect is not optional, it is earned and maintained. Today they learned the cost of assumptions and arrogance, but our job is not finished. We must ensure that these lessons are internalized, not forgotten." The officer nodded in agreement. "Understood, ma'am. How should we proceed with the remaining staff?" "Observation and reinforcement," Ward said calmly. "We continue operations as planned, but we make ourselves a visible example. Let competence, calm authority, and professionalism speak louder than words. The lesson will extend beyond Captain Crane." Back in the break room, Crane reflected on the unfolding repercussions. He realized that the humiliation of the morning was only a fraction of what he had to process. The real challenge was internal, acknowledging his mistakes, adjusting his assumptions, and learning to recognize the authority and competence of others regardless of appearance. He thought back to the way he had approached the situation, silent, precise, and calm. She had never yelled, never intimidated, and yet every person present had understood who held authority. That lesson, he realized, was the most important of all. Leadership was demonstrated through action and composure, not rank alone. The retraining program began immediately. Crane and his team were instructed in updated protocol procedures, security enforcement standards, and leadership evaluation exercises. It was rigorous, precise, and focused on fostering a sense of respect and awareness that Crane had sorely lacked. Each exercise served as a reminder that mistakes made through assumption or ego could have serious consequences, not just for the individual, but for the operation as a whole. Meanwhile, Colonel Ward oversaw every aspect of the retraining, her presence both calming and commanding. Mechanics, crew members, and the pilot observed her methods carefully. She was exacting in her demands, yet fair in her approach. No one dared assume she would tolerate mistakes, yet her corrections were delivered without malice, only clarity and authority. Crane struggled at first, resisting the full weight of accountability. Pride made him defensive, and old habits surfaced in moments of frustration. But each correction, each careful explanation by Ward or her team, chipped away at his arrogance. Slowly, he began to understand the depth of the lesson he had been taught. One exercise involved a simulated emergency protocol. Crane had to follow instructions precisely, working with mechanics and crew members he had previously dismissed. Ward observed silently, noting his hesitations, missteps, and eventual corrections. She allowed him to experience the consequences of assumption firsthand, but without endangering anyone. By the end of the simulation, Crane's posture, movements, and decision-making had shifted subtly but noticeably. After the exercise, Ward addressed him directly. "Captain Crane, do you understand why your assumptions were dangerous today? Not just for yourself, but for the crew, the aircraft, and the mission." Crane nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am, I see it now. I misjudged and I underestimated authority based on appearances. I understand the consequences." "Good," Ward said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Now take that understanding and integrate it into every aspect of your work. Authority is earned, not assumed. Respect is a currency that can be spent carelessly, but recovered only through consistent behavior and acknowledgement of competence." The crew members around them nodded, many quietly murmuring their own realizations. They had all witnessed the morning incident, but now they were seeing the follow-through, a living example of leadership, discipline, and accountability. The lesson extended beyond Crane. It was a demonstration of how authority and competence operate in real-life, high-stakes situations. By the end of the day, Crane felt a mix of exhaustion, reflection, and reluctant admiration. The humiliation he had experienced on the tarmac had been painful, but the lessons embedded in it were invaluable. He now understood that arrogance, assumptions, and reliance on status alone were dangerous. He had seen the power of quiet authority, precision, and composure in action. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the airfield, Colonel Ward addressed her team one final time. Today was not just an operation, but a lesson in professionalism and respect. Ensure that the knowledge and authority you've demonstrated remain evident in every interaction. Let this be a reminder to all. Competence is proven through action, not appearance. Her team nodded in unison, inspired by her calm authority and unwavering standards. Crane, watching from a distance, understood that he had witnessed something extraordinary. Ward had not just corrected mistakes, she had reshaped perceptions, enforced accountability, and taught a lesson in leadership that no one present would ever forget. That evening, as the airfield quieted and crew members departed, Crane remained seated for a long time, reflecting. For the first time, he truly comprehended that leadership required humility, respect, and awareness. Ward had demonstrated that authority was not given. It was earned, maintained, and respected through skill, composure, and professionalism. For Crane, the lessons of the morning would linger forever. He had faced humiliation, reflection, and correction, but he had also witnessed true authority in action. It was a moment that would shape his career, his decisions, and his understanding of respect for the rest of his life. The events of that morning at the airfield did not remain confined to the small tarmac where Captain Crane had first misjudged Colonel Ward. Word of the confrontation, the public humiliation, and the subsequent inspection spread quickly through the aviation and military circles connected to the private jet operation. By midday, whispers and discussions had moved beyond the airfield's perimeter, creating a ripple effect that would touch Crane's career, the crew's reputations, and the wider operational protocols for years to come. Crane sat at his desk in the airfield's administrative office, trying to focus on mundane paperwork, but every form, every routine report seemed trivial compared to the memory of that morning. His colleagues walked by, occasionally casting awkward glances, clearly aware of the incident and unwilling to speak directly about it. Every whisper he overheard reminded him that the story had spread, how a pilot, confident in his years of experience, had publicly misjudged a woman he assumed to be cleaning staff, only to discover she was a decorated SEAL colonel. For Crane, the humiliation was compounded by the realization that his professional credibility was now under scrutiny. His superior officers had requested a full report on the incident, including his behavior, assumptions, and the resulting procedural breach. He knew that every word he wrote, every detail he included, or omitted, would be examined carefully, analyzed for insight into both his judgment and his ability to recognize authority. Colonel Ward, meanwhile, had returned to her operational command center, her presence quietly commanding respect among her team. She was reviewing documentation, debriefing her officers, and ensuring that the inspection and its lessons were recorded with precision. To her, the incident had not just been a matter of correcting a single pilot's error. It was an opportunity to reinforce a culture of respect, professionalism, and vigilance across every level of personnel. "Colonel," one of her officers said, glancing at the detailed report she had compiled, "the field staff and pilot are taking the retraining seriously. The impact of your intervention is evident. This will likely become a case study in procedural integrity and leadership." Ward nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Let this ripple outward. Authority and competence must be recognized, respected, and maintained, whether in combat, aviation, or day-to-day operations. Everyone needs to internalize that lesson. Back at the airfield, Crane had been summoned for a meeting with the director and several senior officers. He walked into the conference room with a sense of dread, fully aware that this was more than a routine discussion. The moment he entered, the weight of authority in the room pressed down on him. Every eye seemed to assess not just his actions, but his very understanding of the morning's lesson. "Captain Crane," the director began, "we've reviewed the incident with Colonel Ward and her team. The breach of protocol was significant, and your assumptions created unnecessary risk. You will undergo formal retraining, and this report will be included in your permanent record. Do you understand the gravity of the situation?" Crane nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir, I understand completely." The meeting continued with a detailed review of the procedural errors, the importance of respecting authority, and the consequences of misjudgment. Every misstep Crane had made was discussed, not in anger but with the clarity of lessons that needed to be learned. The weight of the morning, combined with the formal evaluation, forced him to confront the depth of his failure. Outside the conference room, the ripple effect of the incident continued. Crew members who had witnessed the confrontation were sharing the story carefully, emphasizing the professionalism and calm authority of Colonel Ward. The tale became both cautionary and inspirational. Cautionary for those who might underestimate others based on appearance, inspirational for those who aspired to lead with integrity and composure. Even within broader operational networks, the story spread. Aviation forums, military training discussions, and private pilot groups began referencing the incident as an example of how assumptions can undermine authority and compromise safety. Crane's experience became a living case study, demonstrating that respect must be grounded in competence, not appearances or ego. Crane himself began to internalize these lessons through the retraining exercises. Each simulation, each scenario, was designed to challenge his assumptions, forcing him to respond to dynamic situations with careful observation and humility. He learned to anticipate not just the technical challenges of piloting, but also the human dynamics of authority, competence, and respect. Meanwhile, Colonel Ward continued to monitor the situation from her operational perspective. She recognized that the broader ripple effect of the incident could have lasting benefits if framed correctly. By ensuring that Crane and his team completed retraining and adhered to new operational protocols, she was reinforcing a culture of vigilance and accountability. At the same time, the incident highlighted larger issues within the airfield and aviation operations. Several officers and field managers began reviewing procedures to ensure that no personnel could bypass authority or compromise safety due to assumptions or ego. Policies were updated to emphasize the verification of credentials, recognition of operational authority, and the importance of calm, professional behavior in high-stakes environments. Crane, sitting quietly during retraining sessions, began to understand that his personal humiliation had transformed into a broader educational opportunity. Every mistake he had made, every assumption he had harbored, was now a tool for learning. He started to engage actively with the exercises, asking questions, seeking clarification, and observing the competence displayed by both Colonel Ward and her team. Gradually, he noticed a shift in himself. Pride tempered by humility, confidence grounded in awareness, and authority informed by respect. One evening, after a long day of retraining and procedural reviews, Crane reflected on how dramatically his perspective had changed. The morning's events, once a source of embarrassment, now served as a foundation for growth. He realized that true authority could not be claimed by rank alone. It had to be demonstrated through skill, composure, and consistent adherence to protocol. He had been forced to witness in leadership, and the lessons would remain with him for the rest of his career. Elsewhere, Colonel Ward's influence continued to spread. Officers who had observed her calm authority and precise execution were incorporating similar approaches into their own training and operations. Mechanics, crew members, and even pilots who had initially doubted her competence began to recalibrate their understanding of leadership and respect. The ripple effect of her intervention extended far beyond the airfield, reshaping expectations and behavior across multiple levels of operational oversight. The narrative of that morning became a quiet legend among those connected to the operation, a story of misjudgment, public humiliation, and ultimate accountability. Crane's personal journey, from arrogance to humility, was mirrored by the broader shift in organizational culture, a reminder that assumptions are dangerous, authority must be, and competence cannot be underestimated. By the time Crane completed his retraining, the lessons had been fully embedded. He understood that his prior behavior had endangered not only himself but the crew, the aircraft, and the integrity of operational protocols. The experience had been painful, but the transformation it sparked was profound. For the first time in his career, he could appreciate the value of humility, observation, and genuine respect for competence. Colonel Ward, observing from her operational perspective, noted these changes quietly. Her goal had never been to humiliate but to enforce accountability and professionalism. Crane's development, combined with the broader cultural shift among crew members, represented a success that extended far beyond a single incident. Leadership had been demonstrated, lessons had been taught, and respect had been earned, not assumed, not demanded but truly recognized. As the sun set over the airfield, casting long shadows across the polished fuselage of the aircraft, Crane stood alone for a moment, reflecting on the ripple effect of his mistakes and Colonel Ward's intervention. What had begun as a personal confrontation had grown into a lesson in authority, respect, and professionalism that would resonate across the airfield, and perhaps beyond, for years to come. The weeks following the infamous morning at the airfield had brought dramatic change, not just for Captain Crane, but for the crew, the staff, and the broader operational protocols. Crane, once known for his cocky demeanor and unshakable confidence, had transformed into a man more reflective, disciplined, and aware of the importance of authority, respect, and humility. The incident with Colonel Ward had left an indelible mark, one that would guide every decision he made for the rest of his career. Crane arrived early at the airfield one morning, as he had done countless times before, but the routine felt different now. He observed the crew with new eyes, noticing their competence, their attention to detail, and their quiet professionalism. No longer did he assume knowledge or dismiss input based on appearances. He approached tasks with a renewed sense of awareness, actively seeking collaboration and ensuring that protocol was followed meticulously. Every interaction carried the lessons of that day, every movement a reflection of respect for authority, earned rather than assumed. Colonel Ward had returned to her operational assignments, but her presence still lingered like a guiding principle. The airfield staff often spoke of her calmly, noting how her quiet authority had transformed their perception of leadership. She had shown them that power was not in aggression or status, but in discipline, precision, and the ability to maintain composure under pressure. Her approach had created ripples that extended far beyond the single confrontation. It had reshaped the culture of respect and professionalism across the airfield. Crane, in particular, became a living example of this transformation. Where he had once relied solely on experience and ego, he now emphasized observation, collaboration, and adherence to protocol. He openly acknowledged mistakes, sought guidance when needed, and reinforced the authority of others without hesitation. Crew members noticed the change, and their confidence in him gradually returned, now tempered by mutual respect rather than fear or compliance. One day, during a routine aircraft inspection, Crane found himself working alongside a new maintenance officer. The officer was meticulous and precise, yet young and inexperienced. Crane felt the old instinct to dismiss her competence rising, a faint whisper of pride, but he caught himself. He remembered Ward's calm eyes, her quiet authority, and the way she had earned respect through action rather than assumption. "Ma'am," Crane said respectfully, handing her the checklist, "please verify these readings before we proceed. I want to make sure everything is accurate." The young officer blinked, momentarily surprised by the pilot's courtesy, then nodded. Together, they completed the inspection with flawless precision, Crane silently noting how far he had come from the arrogance that had defined him only weeks earlier. He realized that respect was contagious, earned in one situation and extended naturally to others, creating a culture of competence and trust. Meanwhile, Colonel Ward's influence continued to resonate. Officers who had observed her handling of the incident had incorporated her methods into their own leadership practices. Calm authority, discipline, and precision became benchmarks for professional behavior. The story of her intervention, the pilot who had assumed she was cleaning staff, only to discover she was a SEAL colonel, became more than a cautionary tale. It became a teaching tool, a legend illustrating the power of competence and earned respect. Crane himself began mentoring new pilots and crew members, using his experience as a cautionary example. He recounted the events carefully, emphasizing the lessons rather than the embarrassment. "Never assume authority is limited to rank or appearance," he would tell them. "Respect and competence are what truly define leadership. If you misjudge either, the consequences can be severe." The staff listened, captivated not just by the story, but by the transformation they could witness in Crane himself. They saw a man humbled, corrected, and ultimately strengthened by a single confrontation with someone far more competent than he had anticipated. It was a powerful demonstration of growth, accountability, and the enduring impact of a true leader's example. Even the senior management at the airfield recognized the long-term effects of the incident. Policies were revised to emphasize verification of authority, adherence to protocol, and the importance of respect in all interactions. Retraining programs incorporated the lessons from that day, ensuring that future personnel would benefit from the wisdom gained through Crane's mistakes and Colonel Ward's intervention. The ripple effect of her leadership was now embedded in the operational DNA of the organization. Crane often reflected privately on Ward. He remembered the way she had approached him calmly, without arrogance or anger, yet with unmistakable authority. He remembered the tarmac, the black SUVs, the silent military officers, and the quiet lesson that had changed the trajectory of his professional life. For him, Ward had become more than a formidable officer. She had become the embodiment of leadership itself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the airfield, Crane stood before the jet he had once commanded with unchecked pride. He ran his hand over the fuselage, thinking back to the moment had corrected him, the lessons he had learned, and the changes he had made in himself. He knew he would never make the same mistake again. Arrogance, assumptions, and ego had no place in leadership. True authority required discipline, respect, and an unwavering commitment to competence. Ward had demonstrated this effortlessly, and Crane had absorbed it, fundamentally altering how he approached every interaction and every responsibility. In the weeks and months that followed, the airfield operated with a renewed sense of professionalism. Pilots, crew members, and staff approached their duties with greater awareness, accountability, and respect for each other's roles. Crane continued to grow as a leader, mentoring others, modeling humility, and reinforcing the lessons learned. And though Colonel Ward had moved on to other assignments, her presence was felt everywhere, through the policies she influenced, the personnel she inspired, and the example she had set. The story of the pilot who assumed she was cleaning staff, only to be corrected with quiet authority, became a permanent part of the airfield's culture. Crane never forgot the lesson. He carried it with him in every cockpit, every briefing, and every interaction with colleagues. He had been humbled, corrected, and ultimately transformed. Through Ward, he had learned that respect is earned, Authority is proven, and competence is undeniable. The airfield, once merely a place of routine operations, had become a proving ground for professionalism, humility, and leadership. And at the center of the story, though now physically distant, was Colonel Ward, whose calm authority had turned a moment of conflict into a lasting legacy. As night fell and the lights of the airfield flickered on, Crane looked up at the darkened sky and reflected on the journey. The pilot who had once underestimated a woman in uniform had grown into a leader who understood the true meaning of respect, accountability, and humility. And in the silent wings of the airfield, the lessons of that morning continued to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of competence, composure, and authority earned through action, not assumption.